Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to our session today, conflict resolution and managing change. We'll be starting very shortly. Just before we do so, as we always do, a quick reminder to please make sure you rename to display your e-colors, manage your microphone, put your webcam on is possible, use your headphones to avoid echoes, and let's keep that chat functionality, the chat lively. And also, we will be asking for some contribution today. So please be ready for that as it's certainly coming. All right. All right, we'll start as a few people are still jumping on board, but let's get going. Again, welcome everybody to our session today of our Intentional Leadership Business Series. We are going to be looking at conflict resolution and managing change today, two very interesting and intertwined topics, which again, we'll have a great discussion today about in terms of exploring a bit more about some potential tactics to manage change at an organizational and personal level, and then some relationship in terms of e-colors and conflict resolution to continue to learn more about ourselves and others. So today, as you probably noticed, no Mark Wilkinson. It's David Senior Garcia, and actually I managed to bring on board Laura, who will be co-facilitating this event with myself. So my name is David Senior Garcia. I'm the socializing relator. My e-colors are blue over yellow. I'm an Equilibria director and also a facilitator and coach. As you can see there with my e-colors and my pie chart, rather dominant blue with a lot of yellow and green, and the red being the least I have in my personality makeup. Laura is my sister, and she took all of the red beforehand. So I was left with what was there. Some of my strengths include that I'm supported.
Sorry to bother you.
That's all right. Just let me sort something. 2 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Mute for now. All right. So some of my strengths include that I'm supportive, detailed, reflective, and open-minded. And I think these are particularly, in fact, relevant when it comes to conflict resolution, as there are certainly some strengths I can leverage from my personality that can aid with that kind of assistance in managing and solving conflict. And then some potential limiters like being indecisive, slow to action, sometimes reactive, and even too considerate that it can hinder, or if I don't manage them effectively, you could say hinder my potential to be good at managing and resolving conflict. Laura, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Morning, everyone. Really excited to be here today. And, I actually spoke with David a couple of days ago, and he said, hey, maybe there's an opportunity to be able to share with this great group. I was able to participate in one of the sessions a couple of weeks ago and have looked at the recording. So super excited to be here today. And as David said, we're definitely not Mark, but we'll do our best to make sure that you get a lot of value from today's session, and really looking forward to connecting with all of you. So Laura Senior Garcia, my e-colors are red over yellow, as David mentioned, more the socializing doer. I did the red, it looks like. So as you can see, my red is 46%. Followed by the yellow and then the green, with a very little slice of blue. And one of the things that I always like to mention when I introduce the kind of e-colors makeup is, if there's something that's helpful to me on a day-to-day basis, is remembering that blue being 5%, not just the red yellow part, because if there's something that has the potential to trip me up or to hold me back, is the fact that my low percentage is as low as it is. So just a quick thing that I wanted to share there. So I'm a senior coach with Equilibria, and also the COO, or Chief Operations Officer. So my strengths are that I actually am very energized by achieving. I'm very expressive by nature. I'm very driven. I actually get a lot of energy from getting things done, and I'm very big picture oriented. Those strengths also lead to some of the limiters. I can be too quick to make a decision. I can become a little impatient. I do have a hard time relaxing or being fully present. Is something that I'm always working on, is how can I make sure that I'm not thinking about what's next, what's coming next week, what's the next step ahead. And also I can't be too decisive, because I do get that big picture sometimes quicker than I think is reality, and then will tend to want to make a decision. So that's a little bit about me. And like I said, thank you for having us today.
Thank you, Laura. And as always, we want to start by recapping the e-colors. And today, as we look through these visuals and think about our own tendencies, we want to relate these to how can they help us be great at managing conflicts and navigating change, and some of the things, again, that can potentially hinder us from being as effective as possible. So obviously, we have our doers that want to focus on the what, socializing energy that likes to focus on who, thinkers on the how, and the blue with the why. And again, these are particularly relevant today as when we are indeed understanding others and managing those changes in situations, those conflicts that can arise. The more that we can cater, adapt, and focus on others, and also while managing our tendencies, the more effective we can be. And as Laura and I have discussed, the sides of strengths and potential limiters are very relevant when thinking about these. So again, I just invite you to continue to look at your own strengths and your potential limiters and think about what are some of those elements that can perhaps allow us to thrive in a situation where there's different opinions, where there's different situations that have to be handled, and what are some of those potential limiters that we have to be very intentional at managing to be able to go through change and conflicts effectively. So for today, in terms of conflict resolution, managing change, we want to consider a few things. So conflict can be an inevitable part of life, especially in fast-paced environments where change is constant. Whether it's a disagreement between team members or uncertainty around a new process, conflict often arises when people feel unsettled or unclear. But conflict doesn't have to be disruptive. In fact, if we handle it well, it can be an opportunity for growth, improved communication, and innovation. So as anything in life, it's about perspective. So when we do find that there is this challenge or this conflict that comes to the table, if we see it with the right lens, perhaps it can absolutely be an opportunity for positive change and development. So how do you effectively manage conflict while navigating change? It all starts with a proactive approach to resolution and a mindset that sees change as an opportunity rather than a threat. Again, mindset being the key there. Now, before diving into some really interesting tools, conflict resolution strategies, we want to understand why conflict often spikes during periods of change. I mean, change can make people feel vulnerable, whether it's a new project, shifting teams, roles, organizational changes, and overhauls. And this sense of uncertainty can lead to misunderstandings, misalignments, and sometimes tension between individuals or groups. In these moments, people may be more defensive or resistant to new ideas, which can escalate minor disagreements into larger conflicts. However, this doesn't mean that conflict is inherently negative. If addressed thoughtfully, it can strengthen relationships and lead to better outcomes. So just wanted to provide a little bit of a general thought of what we're going to be discussing today. And our first block of content that we want to offer is going to be a bit more focused on how do we navigate change and conflict in a more team or organizational environment. And then we'll focus and narrow in more towards the individual and how that has a relationship with our personality tendencies.
So David, before we move on to the managing change portion, you could say, I just wanted to also mention, even when we think about the word conflict, a lot of times it has very different connotations to different people and different e-colors. So I think with David and I, it's a prime example of how we may perceive conflict differently. So we mentioned my e-colors are red over yellow, David's e-colors, blue, yellow can sometimes also lean towards the green. So David, would you mind describing how you feel or how you see what actually constitutes conflict? Like, what is conflict for you?
Right. And again, even going through a little bit of the framing today, I was already that term kind of raises a little bit of a concern for me as to me, conflict is usually associated or framed as a negative, whereby it's sort of already too late after a conversation could have been had, in my perspective. So I don't necessarily, you could say, have a great relationship with that term conflict, as I do tend to avoid it or really kind of walk away from it. Having said that, if it's a conversation with very different points of view, I don't see that as a conflict. I see that as a natural evolution. I see that as a positive outcome. So it may just be myself reframing the term to be most effective. To me, when it's a conflict, it's a bit too late, right? But again, that may be term association. You could say that generally speaking, a conflict could be defined as an opposing view that then turns into perhaps more of an issue over time. But again, I would tend to stay away from getting a situation to a perceived, you could say, level of conflict. Having said that, I've worked with many people that have a very different approach or view on that, and they do see those different differences in perspective as conflicts that need to be resolved. What do you think, Laura?
So I'm smiling because I know that every time that, we work around different people with different e-colors, the moment that, let's say, the terms healthy conflict comes up or a healthy debate, it's usually someone with either a top color red or top color yellow personality bringing up those terms, healthy conflict, healthy debate, because I think a lot of us that are in that space thrive in that environment. We sense that environment as generating new options or new ideas or not getting stagnant. And I just wanted to bring that up, that even how we relate to the word conflict and how we relate to different terms, even when it comes to when we go now into change, can be different depending on a different personality. Okay, so I would like to share some thoughts with you around how to lead through change. David mentioned that this part is going to be more team focused or organizationally focused, and then we'll get more into the individual tools. But for any of you that are either working within a team or working within a company, or you're having to lead or be a part of any process of change, which is constant when you're in business, I think you'll find this quite helpful. Now, as David said, inherently, when we change or when changes are happening, it does lead to usually a higher level of what people perceive as conflict, because their role may change, or a process that we're utilizing may change, or something that was previously a focus area may not be a focus area anymore. So it does have like a big impact in our overall work. In today's business environment, one of the key roles of manager or a leader is understanding how to manage change effectively. There's a lot of research that is out there in the market about how often organizational changes happening are usually, in terms of timing, you could say happening before. It used to be a lot out, where it was like every 10 years or there would be some kind of organizational change. Now it's kind of compressed into a lot of businesses to see these cycles of change happening about every 3 years. So it's something that is really, really key, is how do you lead through change? Not just how do you lead others, but how do you lead yourself through change, which is something that is a constant in our life. So some data for those of you that kind of like more of the statistics, the current state, you could say, of managing change. This is from the Gartner Workforce Change Fatigue Survey, and I found this to be appealing. So I'll just hit all of the high points here. 74% of employees were willing to support an organizational change in 2016. Today, only 38% say the same. So the drop is pretty significant in terms of people that are willing to support organizational changes. So that's something to consider there. So you could say that people that are leading through change are experiencing that the people that they're trying to lead are going through this change fatigue, where they're naturally going to be less inclined to want to be, supportive of any kind of change happening. 37% of employees report that they trust their organizations less than before the COVID-19 pandemic. And by the way, I want to mention that this is international data. It's not just based on one particular region or country. So this was kind of based on a global study. And then a top-down approach to change is because most workers are also increasingly expecting being treated in a more human way, and also getting a more kind of human approach as part of their employee experience. So, and this one I thought, this is interesting that it's not 100% versus 82, but 82% of employees say it is important their organization sees them as a person and not just an employee. And then finally, 74% of employees say leaders need to do more to understand why people resist change. So why is it that we have a natural conflict with change, or that we resist change, and kind of a consideration there. So I wanted to just give this information as a current state snapshot of, if you're leading people or leading yourself through change, to understand that there are some factors there around how we perceive change at the moment that may just be very generalized, not just to our individual level. Okay, so what I would like to do now is kind of open up, and I know that for some of you it's going to take a minute to think about your answers here, so it's okay if we have a little bit of silence. I ask for a volunteer to please share a time that you've either felt excited, apprehensive, or frustrated about a change at work. What was the most productive thing you did or wish you would have done to manage this change? What traps would you warn people about? And would you give any tips to offer others in this group about how to handle change? And I've seen that, Fred, you had your hand up?
Yeah, Laura, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hi, Fred.
Hi, Laura. How are you doing? Hi, David. Good day, everyone. Real early here at 1 a.m. here in the Bay Area, and I think conversation currently going through a lot of change within our organization. So I think there's so let's deal with each part. So the excitement part is that change is an opportunity to get better, provided that the intention is proper and there's understanding of the direction that we're going. My company is a Titanic, and so it's hard for that ship to go in a different direction. And when leadership go in a different direction, many times they're not transparent. However, it's exciting to see them that they want to grow and that they want to develop. That's exciting. However, in the confines of the apprehension is, it is not people focused. It is more focusing on the external, focusing on everything else but the people. And I think the part that frustrates me the most is, as a Marine who was a leader in war conflict, we don't use conflict the proper context. We should learn, I tell everybody within my company, we should learn to be more collaborative and complementary instead of competitive. It's the competitive spirit against our competitors that is ultimately becoming the cancer inside that is us from truly growing, because we're not prioritizing our people as the greatest thing. And so in this current change, the most productive thing that I can do is that I lead from the shadows about being a voice of consistency. I am committed to being consistent, even in the aspect of change, where I use the phrase semper gumby. As a Marine, we were taught to always be faithful, but I'm flexible. I'm a mutable sign outside of my colors. I'm a mutable energy. I can go with the flow provided that the information and the intent of the information is transparent. The traps is people don't like authenticity. So you have to be very careful on who you have to know the difference in the relationships of your confidants, your comrades, and your your constants or your constitutes. You have to know the difference between who is for you and who's against you. And the biggest thing for me in handling change is me personally is I'm always introspective of my own feelings because I am a top cover yellow and people are my highest priority. So while people are my highest priority, it is also my greatest weakness because I serve people tend to take advantage and use my energy against me. So I've had to learn how to balance what what I want to change and what outcomes I want to see to influence so that I can remain psychologically safe out.
Oh, awesome. Thank you very much, Fred. Very, very insightful. Really appreciate it. And I do think that this very much ties in with the session that Mark led around different fears as well, and how we respond to different fears. So I really, really appreciated that input. I think you mentioned a few keywords: consistency, commitment, collaboration, that are also very helpful when it comes to leading through change. I want to pick up on what Fred said there in terms of consistency. When you're a larger group through change, if you can be very consistent, with the messages so that people don't feel that there is added uncertainty, is definitely very helpful. So as much as possible, our role as leaders is to reduce the amount of uncertainty that is within our control as we're leading people through change, and really help to zoom them in and focus on what is it that we know are the facts, and what is it that maybe it's not, doesn't have to be, because it's not a priority right now. So thank you very much, Fred. David, any adds to that?
Again, also the intention side, the authenticity, I think that was key. We as human beings, when we are being led through to a new paradigm, a new direction, it tends to be important, at least for that kind of more human side of us that was mentioned before, to feel that the place or the where people are coming from is within a good intent, and that transparency of the reason behind the change is absolutely key.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. Okay, so moving on. Again, thank you, Fred, for the example there. I want to transition to, as in this topic of managing change, what are some of the things that you can keep in mind when you are communicating change intentionally? And what are those kind of critical steps within that process? So first one that really goes to our pause and play and to personal intervention and to understanding your colors is identify your reaction and response to change. So if you're going to be the one leading others through change, it's really important that you're super intentional to how you're digesting this change yourself. What are the words that to describe the change? How are you describing it? If are you presenting something and saying, well, I was just told to do this, or I was asked to do this, or do you actually have a way that you can buy into it in terms of your desired response, so it will be more authentic, to Fred's point, when you're leading others? The second one in this four-step process is engaging in intentional communication. So being really intentional about what you communicate about the change, and we'll show a slide in a moment here that some of you may find really helpful around what are those key questions that you want to answer to make sure that you have all the different bases for communication covered when it comes to leading through change. The other one is empowering team ownership of change implementation. So if you remember that data that we shared just a few minutes ago, important it is that people feel that they are a part of the change process as much as possible, of making the decisions. Say, for example, you work in a company that is going through a rebranding and you're redefining the mission and the vision. It's going to be a lot more effective if you can get involvement at different levels of organization, rather than if it's just 3 or 4 people sitting there going, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And then, we decide what it's going to look like and roll it out to everybody else. And people, their level of commitment and ownership, when you can empower the team to be part of any change that's happening, will be huge. And then how do you support the change adoption? How do you make sure that you're looping people in and going, are things working? Are they not working? How can we make sure that this change is successful if others haven't been successful in the past? And here are the questions that I just mentioned, that these are helpful when communicating any change, that you can keep in mind as if you want to be intentional with your communications. And I think these are actually helpful if you reframe them, not even just at a team or organization level, but when you're explaining any level of change, when there could be a perceived conflict, you could say. So the first one is, why do you need to change? What are your key objectives? A lot of times we say, hey, we're going to do this versus that. But what we fail to explain is, why are we doing it this way versus the other way? So the why is not something that comes naturally to a lot of us. I'll put my hand up first as a topic color red. Why is not something that I tend to focus on. And even in the work that David and I do together, I always have to remind myself to go back to explaining, hey, this is why I would like to do this way, or why we're going about it this in this direction. So that's one. The second one is, how will it affect the way that people work? So really explaining the how, how does this impact what we're currently doing? And things that I would include in here is, what are we going to take away? Because if we're introducing something new, we tend to add more and more things, but we never take anything away of what we're currently doing. The third one is, who will it impact? How will it impact people positively? Again, and you see that one is highlighted in yellow. We may have a tendency to just talk about, the downside of a change, but it's very important to really include in our narrative, how is this going to impact people positively? And finally, what will the benefits be to the organization? How is this change generating value? So it's something that, it kind of covers all different ones. And I see we've got some activity on the chat that I'm loving. Paul Davis mentioned, I've always used change champions within different teams across an organization. Absolutely. Change agents, people who are going to be those early adopters or advocate. And I like as well here how Steve Whiteside mentioned use the following strategy in the past: keep people informed, included, interested, and inspired. That's a really, really great one. And to kind of Fred's point before, with transparency as much as possible and authenticity. And from John Johnston, we have here John P. Cotter's Leading Change is a book that was really helpful for me when doing a restructuring of business. Yes, so actually Cotter's model is one of the models we looked at when it comes to this 4-step change management process. Excellent. So moving on. Ooh, I love the animations on this slide. Kudos to Emma. I know that she did a lot of work on this. This was a much, I would say, more basic looking slide before. So I really appreciate this. So what I wanted to just mention here in this gear model that has a lot of different elements to it. But what I would say is, when we are leading through change, or where we are dealing with any significant conflict, we may tend to focus really quickly on the desired outcomes. Like, this is what we want to get to, this is the end goal. But many times we, where does it all start and what do we need to focus on? And a lot of that is, are the leaders knowledgeable about what needs to happen, and what are the right language and behaviors that leaders need to be displaying? And I want to just again remind all of us that when we talk about leadership, we're not just talking about people who are in positions of authority or who have other people reporting to them. We lead ourselves, we lead through influence, we lead in our family. So there's a lot of different paradigms when it comes to leadership that don't just include authority. So just wanted to mention here that it's key that we put the focus where it's going to have the most significant impact on the results, and that is in our language, our behaviors, and how we lead through our knowledge. The other key part about this is those chains that represent the engagement and feedback. If we're not actively engaging people, answering those questions that we showed on the last slide, that would look like part of that engagement, and getting people's feedback, we're not going to get to those desired outcomes maybe as quickly or even be able to get to them at all. So really, really suggest to think about this when you're trying to drive a change. Are you focused in the right part of this gear model that will help you get towards those desired outcomes? David, any comments on that, on the gear model? Because I know this is something that you have worked with a lot.
No, again, it's you mentioned it starts with leader knowledge, and again, I really want to emphasize that when we mention that it's putting ourselves right there is the key, right? It starts with developing our own knowledge, managing our tendencies, understanding more from the world, not only e-colors, but of course, all of these other resources that are out there to develop our knowledge, our experience, our belief system, and then how we action that is through those language and behaviors, because at the end of the day, it's how we engage others. So it says workforce there because it's more of a kind of a traditional organizational model. But if you think about in terms of your family members, any kind of organization or individuals that you're looking to influence and work with, it all starts with ourselves, our knowledge, and then the language and behaviors that we display to the world, absolutely key.
By the way, as well, when we think about this from an individual level, and sometimes we don't like to take as much ownership of how much impact we have on ourselves, but even how we talk, the words that we use to describe ourselves, to describe how we can accomplish things or how we're not going to be able to accomplish things, or if we continuously tell ourselves, I'm not good at this, or I am good at this, has a direct impact on us being able to accomplish the results we're trying to achieve at an individual level. So sometimes really taking ownership about the language we're using to describe ourselves is also extremely important when it comes to achieving change. Let's say you want to change a habit, or you want to lose weight, or you want to grow your wealth, whatever it is, how you talk about these things is going to have a direct impact on your own ability to believe that you can do it or not.
Yeah, and actually there'll be quite a bit more of that conversation next week, Laura. So it's well introduced.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and then finally, in this kind of a little section around managing change and how it ties into also conflict that can arise during change. I think some of you have either seen this model before, or you will have seen, Mark post about it as well. We use the 8 essentials of high-performing teams, as you can see here, to really describe what are some of the elements we need to be very aware of as we're leading through change. How does it impact, in terms of, do we understand the team members? Do we understand what's going on in the team? Is the vision and values clear? So if you want to go to the next slide, David, I actually have some specific examples here in terms of how you can help drive effective management by using the 8 essentials. So the first one you can see here is understanding and discussing what are our team's strengths and limiters that can better prepare us for whatever change is coming. Then also aligning the team goals, revisiting what's important to us, what's our vision, what's our mission, what are the values, what's the strategy. Clearly defining what are different people's role in this change. A lot of times we can blow way out of proportion the impact that a change is going to have by not just defining, hey, Emma, this is what your role is within the next few weeks while we go through this change. David, I'd like to get your input. Do you want to be involved in this or not? Very clear expectations and roles and responsibilities within change can make a difference and reduce conflict. And then building trust and the psychological safety by having those open dialogues, allowing people to express themselves, how they feel about it, understanding that change doesn't feel the same for everyone, and that some of us thrive and want change, and others do really not like being involved in change that they perceive to be change for change's sake. So you'll hear that kind of comment come out. Then actively seek out to incorporate diverse perspectives. This is a tough one when you have a lot of red in your personality, because we may perceive that if I ask more people, it's going to take me longer because I need to involve more people and I'm going to get different perspectives and opinions. I promise you that the final outcome will be better when you get a rounded perspective and really be inclusive of people. Reinforce commitment. And again, a lot of the words that Fred used before here. Hold regular check-ins to make sure that people feel like, they have their clear responsibilities and accountabilities. And finally, implement a feedback loop to make sure that we are not disregarding that we could be doing better with some of the things that have been decided. And I just want to point out from Angela, I have observed that leadership can also come without the knowledge, but have the passion and desire to make a change when they see an issue that would benefit from change. That's where managers or those with the knowledge can support their drive and lead in a team. Excellent comment. Thank you very much, Angela. Okay, David?
Thank you, Laura. And again, some great strategies here based on our 8 Essentials model, which we'll surely be looking more into in the future and focusing on. So now going more from an individual perspective and considering our e-colors, our personality tendencies, the way we're potentially wired and how we may see these different conflicts, it's going to be interesting to review some of the, you could say, strengths within our tendencies, some of the elements that we have to look out for, and maybe even some potential strategies to be able to be more effective when dealing with conflict, or you could say, again, changes that arise in conflict. Now, what I want to do is I have the 4 describers of the 4 main e-colors here. And of course, we can take a moment to look into that. But I would like to ask if we do have the volunteers available or somebody of a different top e-color to go ahead and contribute in terms of sharing a situation that may be related to some of this content or just something that has happened in their personal experience in the past, and how that perhaps they, you could say, how they reacted to a given change, and also how they have, or what they've learned from that, what we learned from that, and the strategies or the tactics that we now intentionally apply when dealing with conflict, when dealing with these different situations. So if there's a top color yellow in the group that would like to just share, again, a change that they've experienced in the past, how they reacted to it, and some of the tactics they put in place to improve, that would be great. And of course, there's going to be one for yellow, one for red, one for green, one for blue. So again, if somebody wants to go ahead and contribute, that's great. If not, we'll just give it a couple of moments and move on.
Well, David, I'm a top color yellow. I'm probably one because we're the few, the proud, the Marines in the world. I just continue to reiterate, just looking at the 3 points here, strengths. So I think our ultimate strength is the fact that people can rely on us to be the leader, regardless of our level. I say it this way: I'm as smart as my CEO. I have more education than my CEO. I don't have as much experience in the sector or the industry as he does. However, I try to challenge them to what Laura said, because many times they are only comfortable with a certain classification, 43 to 63, 6'3" to 6'6", and they only go, and I purposely challenge them from my strength of being a person of relationship. My challenge is that people take my energy and they take my care, my concern, and my compassion, and they contort that word passion and they try to make it negative when it's not negative at all, right? So I've had a very challenging time in trying to dissuade the top cover or the C-suite in understanding. I learned this the hard way, that I am not intimidating, they are rather intimidated. I'm intentionally now trying to build a bridge to them to say, I'm not here to challenge you. I'm trying to collaborate and complement you, but it's hard because you're bringing resolution to us, but creating conflict by not answering the how, the why, and the when intentionally. And if they would just do that, I mean, the truth is what the truth is. We can't run from it, and we can all grow and work together. It's better to bless people out the door than to curse people who have worked so hard in their life to give energy to something that is seemingly changing in front of their eyes.
Absolutely, Fred. Thank you for that. And again, I think it was a very real perspective in sharing how a top color yellow can influence and be part of that change and deal with conflicts. And also, I want to recognize your background probably also has you prepared above the, the kind of standard human being in dealing with different situations that may arise and how you respond to certain situations given your previous experiences. Excellent.
Yeah,
Not
thank
for
you.
thank you for that. So for the high blue, for the relator, some of those strengths include that empathy, that patience, being good listeners, coming from a perspective of respect and an understanding. But sometimes we can be a little bit in that kind of avoidance of conflict or confrontation and may struggle with assertively expressing our needs, behaviors, thoughts, etc., which can lead to unresolved issues. So again, any kind of volunteer, a top color blue volunteer to share something that may have been faced in the past that surrounding a conflict that perhaps was unresolved or something that there could have been a little bit more work to be done, and how from a tactic perspective, anything that was learned, anything that we can share with fellow top color blues and all obviously in terms of how to deal with that conflict.
Do you want to share one of yours, David?
Sure thing. So I'd say one of the most common ones for me is within a home environment. My wife, my significant other, is also a top color blue, and oftentimes we can get into a space of reaction rather than response from a personality perspective. So it's really important that while there's usually a deep conversation about certain things that we don't see eye to eye and things kind of moving forward from a conversational perspective effectively, what often happens is that it doesn't result in any action from none of us because the red's not really dominant, quite frankly. So there's a really kind of important thing to do, which is after we have effectively resolved the conversation, heard from each other, which again, we're great at that part, that we commit to a certain action to move forward. So again, I think from a very kind of top blue perspective, understanding and kind of, I would say, pressing that play button to be heard is absolutely key. But then actually having the strength or the desire to follow up with a given action rather than just going back to our perceived or natural or kind of non-change approach would be key in terms of really kind of being effective in the future. And of course, if you're managing, dealing, working with somebody of that e-color, you probably want to be very aware of that in terms of after everything's been said and heard, what are the key actions that we want to take? And let's follow up to ensure that they are fulfilled.
Love the comments on the chat, by the way. Absolutely great comments here from Andy and from Angela.
Excellent. So over to our top reds, again, typically action-oriented, decisive, goal-focused, and often approach conflict with a problem-solving mindset, ready to tackle things and move to the next task potentially. And again, that can sometimes come off as confrontational or even impatient, and maybe prioritizing that resolution and that desired direction over the feelings of others, which could potentially seem like bulldozing through a conflict or not really addressing the emotions involved. And again, a potential resolution approach, taking a step back, listening, emphasizing, don't overlook those emotions or perspectives. So again, just want to invite if anybody with a top red would like to share perhaps a perspective where this applied or just a personal one that and how kind of that change was taking place in some of those lessons associated.
I wouldn't mind
Happy
doing that.
to.
And David, it's Reed
Yeah,
here.
go
Mate.
for
How
it,
you doing?
Reed.
Hi, Reed. We'll have Reed and Karen share. Please go ahead, Reed.
Just a personal perspective. It's been a few years now since I was introduced to e-colors and understanding what my personality tendencies are. And I constantly look back to how I used to behave or react to certain situations, especially with regard to conflict resolution. And I absolutely did what was suggested in this slide is I didn't really step back and listen, or certainly didn't empathize at all in those situations. So there was definitely situations where there will be quite a serious situation that needed to be quickly resolved. So I jumped in to resolve it. But certainly the word bulldozing is very apparent there. I would bulldoze the resolution to the room of 5 or 6 people that maybe were, greens and blues, and they were all scared. I actually on a HR review some years ago, it totally shocked me actually and upset me, to be honest, is that I was accused of being scary by some members of my team, which really, really affected me because I didn't see myself as that individual. But now I understand what my tendencies are. What I tend to do now is use the pause button an awful lot more and listen 200-300% more than I used to. The listening skill set that I've picked, that I've been practicing, has been the most effective for me. Letting something out there, using my red to put the stuff on the table, and then press the pause button to sit back and let others, articulate and ask questions to people. And it's been life-changing actually in my work and my personal, because my wife is a blue-green. So, from a personal perspective, from a relationship perspective, I would tend to do the same to her in the past, where I would bulldoze a decision-making process, or let's go do this, let's book a holiday and go here or there. And I never really considered that she needed lots of detail and time to absorb all that. And I would just go away and go back and say, "Oh, I've done this. It's all done. We're going tomorrow." And I think it would drive her bonkers, if I'm honest. So yeah, all these things are very, very apparent to a red. But in terms of the strengths, I'm still tapping into the strengths of a red. I'm very aware of those, but being measured in my approach, because I've realized in my work environment, there isn't that many reds, I don't believe. For now, I've got an understanding. It's more yellows and blues and greens. There isn't that many reds. When I come across someone that is a red, it's very apparent to me now, because I can it jumps out the page to me when they're in the room and they're doing the bulldozing effect and they're control and I'm actually surprisingly managing them in a different way by saying, just a second, great point. Let's just slow it down a little bit. Let's ask the room whether they've got an opinion about what you just said. So yeah, for me, it's been life-changing on both work and personal fronts.
Thank you, Reed. That's awesome. And again, there is very little separation between professional and personal when it comes to our self-development and awareness. It can just absolutely apply in all the environments. Karen, you want to mention something briefly?
I was just hi everyone. I was just smiling. Yep. I find, and I don't know, I'm quite high yellow as well, so I don't know if that sometimes there's a conflict between the two with me, and I see it. So I see a lot of the yellow and the red, but I find if I'm the more important, at least to me, the situation is, the more I might fall into some of those. I don't, no disrespect, but I don't like the word bulldozing, but that could be just because I don't think that's what I do. But I pretty sure I do. You know, when I'm under stress, I will probably just, okay, let's make a decision, for goodness sake, you know. And it's interesting because over the years, I've always ended up in a leadership role, strangely enough, although I wasn't really looking for it. And it was always a curiosity to me because I actually don't really love conflict. So I sometimes I don't like conflict and I try to avoid it, actually. However, there is a moment where it needs to be dealt with and it's time to move on. And particularly in the work side of things, I'm probably better at dealing with it than I am personally, because I think personally I go to the other side, other bits of me, and therefore I just, oh, I don't want to have that conversation. So interesting. Yeah. And of course, learned behaviors, and learning to be a coach was a very interesting process. Yeah. And it's hard sometimes, I think, to not just sort of sit there and, oh, for goodness sake, just make a decision now, you know, like, so sometimes one-on-one coaching can be a bit challenging, like for me, because I'm like, yep, okay. But sometimes I need to do that self-care as well. Look in the mirror and go, you've said this many times now, it's time to move on, you know, so
Yeah.
there's both ways there. So, yeah. So, yeah, I certainly recognize lots of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I think that's also a really interesting perspective around when things are really important to us. It may even be harder to manage ourselves intentionally, as much as it may be the most important factor that, or the most important time to do so. When it really hits home close to our values or our commitments, our deeper selves, it may be harder to move away from our stance. And again, sometimes it's not moving away from our stance isn't the key. It's more about how we approach others and how we continue to maintain that positive environment. And last but not least, top color green, high thinkers, high greens, analytical and objective, excel at breaking down complex issues, finding those rational solutions. But can I be challenged in overanalyzing, perhaps being overly self and critical of others or detaching emotionally. And again, this could delay the situation a bit too far and cause consequences rather than addressing immediate emotional needs. And in terms of the approach, perhaps showing that empathy, acknowledging emotions to complement their logical perspectives can help assure a more rounded or more considerate approach. And again, last but not least, any top color green volunteer to share an experience they've had in going through a change and some of the elements that they learned from that.
I'd love to. If I, it's so can you hear me okay?
Yes, all good.
Yeah. It's so interesting in my career how I can't bear conflict. It really sends me into a spiral. I hate it. But that's a strong word, but I dislike it. But I've had to learn to live with it in the field that I've worked in. So if, for example, I think it's very situational. So it depends on the situation a lot of the times as to how we respond. So if I work in healthcare, so if there's a patient who's having real conflict with another patient or a member of staff or a relative, I have to dial up the red to act quickly in that situation. I've also dealt with very large strategic system-based change involving lots of organizations. So at that point, you then have to become more collaborative, more yellow in a way to engage people, to listen to people. So for me, I think the lessons that I've learned in my career is, number one, it depends on the situation. And number two, it's around relationships, building relationships, and that involves listening. Because if you have organizations who are at conflict with each other, you have to pick off certain key individuals, get them in a room or take them for a coffee or try and understand what their perspective is on a situation, and then as a leader try to balance that with everybody. And in healthcare we definitely try and avoid the use of change, the word change, and actually focus more on improvement.
Yeah.
Because if we're trying to improve something, it's much easier to get on board. And then the third point I just wanted to make was around how you communicate. If you're managing large scale change and that is going to involve conflict with people, the worst can do that really winds people up is when they don't have enough detail to hang their hat on. So they need to know when, they need to know why, they need to know how, and they need to know who. And if the plan veers from that at any time, you have to communicate with them, really. So I think they're the sort of 3 key bits that I've had to learn the hard way over the years for someone that doesn't like conflict at all.
Thank you, Angela. That's great. And thank you for bringing attention to the different situations and also how how those drive different needs. Very different to deal with an interpersonal conflict than conflict in organizations whereby there's a mass change required. They're truly different situations that we have to address. So thank you for that. So closing out, just a few tools that we'll certainly be sharing when it comes to a very simplistic but useful approach when resolving conflict. Let's think about the situation. Let's get the facts. Let's get the details. Relate to the other individual or organization. Demonstrate that empathy. Listen to understand. A lot of times that listening aspect has certainly been mentioned. And then socialize, communicate, engage, get some advocates, get that kind of idea enrolled with others and shared, and so it becomes a lot easier to move forward. And finally, act together to move forward. Commit to your behaviors being aligned with what you say and act consistently. Very, very important. Now, we want to take it a step further. We'll also be sharing this quick cards in terms of getting it resolved. And of course, it alludes to resolving a conflict. And I really like these because they tend to speak very clearly for the different D colors. So of course, as a top blue, this one's more for self. So if I'm a top blue, I should be looking at the top blue one rather than thinking of others like in other materials. So if you want to look at your own, either now when we send this, it's just a nice reminder of some of those elements that are going to be really relevant to yourself. If I look at the blue one, for example, and that third one, stand up for your views and don't shy away, that's really relevant for me. And then, as I mentioned, deliver on your committed actions on the plan. Don't just let it slide because a little bit of me doesn't really want to change or doesn't really want to deal with the conflict. So that's certainly good reminders. And it's great because those reminders are going to be tailored for each of the E colors here when it comes to resolving these types of situations. And oftentimes, we'll speak more about this in the future, but oftentimes these conflicts arise, especially when they're in a one-on-one basis. A conversation around mutual expectations helps to clarify and helps to clear the environment, because oftentimes if it's more of an interpersonal conflict, when we align on what we expect from each other, from a perspective of what do you need from me in order to be successful and what I need from you to be successful, and having that conversation can really help minimize, clarify, and in fact solve some of the conflicts that we may be perceiving. And this is a tool that we'll revisit in the future in terms of aligning with others, in terms of being able to effectively align in some of these items. So at the end of the day, just closing out, how can we make a difference? Of course, we want to foster open communication, actively listen to understand, focus on the problem, not the person, embrace flexibility. That was mentioned a few times, that flexibility during change, collaborate on solutions, use change as a catalyst for growth, engage our mindset. Perhaps it may need to be modified a bit. Perhaps we want to kind of continue to work on it, and engage your personality knowledge using the E-colors. Really relevant for self and others when it comes to conflict resolution and managing change. At the end of the day, conflict during times of change can feel daunting, but with the right approach, it doesn't have to be disruptive. By fostering open communication, practicing active listening, and focusing on collaboration, you can turn potential conflicts into opportunities for seamless change. It's not something to avoid, it's something to master. And again, perhaps it takes a bit of reframing or it doesn't, but point being that when we have these differences in perspectives, these differences in approach, we want to do something about it. Generally speaking, letting these elements just, pester, not do anything with them, is usually not going to bring a positive, impactful, meaningful change. So when handled well, it can strengthen relationships, improve processes, and build more resilient teams. Embrace the challenges that come with change and use them as a springboard for growth, creativity, and success. We want to be forgiving, accepting, and be grateful. These are the antidotes to fear, and they start to build faith, belief, and confidence. So with that, thank you very much. It's been excellent to be able to be a part of this. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more of these next year as we have more and more sort of invited speakers and listen to different perspectives. Really look forward to keep this up, keep this going, and keep this group engaged and growing. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, we can kind of stay for a few minutes, but if not, you're absolutely welcome to shoot out. Laura, any closing comments from yourself?
No, just really wanted to express my gratitude for everybody's engagement and for keeping the chat very much alive. Love how diverse the group is here, and I know that the people who received the recording that weren't able to be here are certainly going to appreciate, how interactive this was. So really appreciate it. And David, I want to thank you for bringing up that model on the conflict resolution. Great reminder. The moment I saw that, for me, it's about where you're not naturally good at, or it's not your strongest point, really, before you're having those conversations that could be this difficult, reminding yourself of being intentional in the areas where we may not be that great at. So for example, for me, it was the reminder of empathy on the relating. So really appreciate you bringing it again.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and especially for you, Fred, or maybe go back to bed. But thank you for joining. Really appreciate everybody's presence.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.